Before this game came out, I remember listening to a preview from the YouTuber SkillUp. In that preview, he talked about how this game had the potential to be a very good live service game. He compared it to Deep Rock Galactic in that Deep Rock Galactic didn't promise to be a live service from the get-go, but that there was such a demand that it just ended up that way. And he believed that Space Marine 2 had that kind of potential. I quote, "As far as I know, there is no battle pass, it's just a straight-up video game. But it has the scaffolding in place that if you wanted to organically grow this to become a live service, it could do that. And maybe Space Marine 2 becomes this living, ever-evolving experience that continues to deliver new adventures in the grimdark 40K universe." End quote. And that's basically exactly what I would like to happen with Space Marine 2. The gameplay is good enough, and their depiction of the 40K universe is good enough, that I would like to continue exploring that universe here, not wait for some other game that someone else makes down the line. This game has a firm foundation from which DLC expansions and or any additional content can be done. And it seems to me like the developers agree. Even before the game released, we had this roadmap promising new operations, new weapons, new enemies, and the roadmap is especially encouraging because it seems to be following the Deep Rock Galactic model, in that they are offering a season pass with paid cosmetics. But the meat of this roadmap, the additional enemies, weapons, and game modes, is free. And now that the game has come out and their success is obvious, they're even more brazen in their hints to where this game is going to go. For example, in their recent post-release trailer, they showed a picture of this. It depicts Necron architecture and it says they'll be back, possibly implying the addition of Necrons as an enemy faction. On his Twitter, the creative director has said, "We've created an amazing foundation with this game. All the tech and gameplay mechanics are in place to move forward and tell all kinds of stories. Only time will tell where we go, but there is a huge possibility." Which is exactly what I want to hear. He was also asked, will there be any future expansions on the story in-game? If so, will it introduce new characters to fight alongside throughout the said story? He responds, "There will be future story additions for sure, but I cannot comment on that at this time without spoiling it." And finally, when asked about the Necron Tomb World, he says, "If I told you it could spoil things. The 40K universe is massive, and that Tomb World shows people as ancient and complex as the galaxy is. The races that have come and gone before humans even existed is such a great theme, there's a lot of potential for great stories." So he says they have a great foundation. He confirms that there will be future story additions, and repeatedly emphasizes the potential of the stories that they can tell given their strong foundation. Given his attitude, given the picture on their trailer, and given the trajectory of their initial roadmap, I'm pretty much convinced that the devs are preparing to deliver a lot more content than the roadmap suggests. So with that in mind, and assuming that the sky's the limit, I'd like to talk about what I would personally want to see in these coming updates. First of all, I would like there to be a bigger emphasis on unique bosses, both in any upcoming main campaigns and in any future operations. Going through the story, one of the things that impressed me is that the bosses we have are actually very good, and made even better if you're playing in co-op. In fact, I would say that the entirety of the story is a lot better if you play with a friend. During the sections where Imura speaks directly to your mind, you'll hear different things depending on who you're playing as. The content of what he says is personalized to each player. During the final boss fight, you can be separated by your brothers, and while you're in there, the fight with Imura continues for the other two. It's very cool, and finally, they're just actually challenging bosses that continue to be challenging, even for multiple people. They seem built from the ground up to be able to deal with multiple targets at once. And most of the unique boss encounters have left me pretty impressed. Though I do want to clarify that I'm talking about the unique boss encounters. Specifically the two fights with Imura, the Operation Hive Tyrant boss, and to a lesser degree the Helldrake fight. The non-unique bosses are fine, some of them are pretty good like the Hellbrute and the Carnifex, but they really went above and beyond when it came to the unique bosses, and it's a shame that there's so very few. I'd also like the main story of Space Marines 2 to give you a reward based on the difficulty that you clear it on. Currently, you don't get anything from Space Marine 2. You don't get experience or currency for operations or PvP. And I think that's a mistake. The story is fun. It's fun to go on your own or with your friends. But it would at least have been nice to be able to get some unique cosmetics for doing the story on certain difficulties. And maybe some currency along with that, even if it was a one-time thing. Just any kind of cosmetic or material reward would be a welcome incentive to do those missions on a harder difficulty. Now let's talk about the end of the campaign. We got a cliffhanger at the end of the campaign, hinting at more to come. and it was a very interesting cliffhanger, I thought probably the best part of the story. But it's not the kind of thing I would like to see extended to Space Marine 3. Given that I expect Space Marine 2 to continue to deliver on content for a long time, if and when Space Marine 3 is a thing, I want that to be radically different, and not beholden to the story points that happened in 2. I want the developers to be free to do whatever they want, not to be bound by tying up loose ends. They could have Space Marine 3 follow a different Space Marine chapter, not the Ultramarines, not Titus, if they so chose. Which means that this mission that you're going to go do, and the character drama between you and Leandros, is something that could be resolved in a lengthy DLC. That is what I want. I want a lengthy story DLC, at least the length of the main campaign, that resolves or expands the existing plot points. I want to see what happens between Leandros and Titus. I want to see hints or explanations as to why Titus might be warp resistant. What is this special mission that Leandros volunteered you for? And of course, I would like this mission to include a new enemy faction to fight, with this new faction being the central antagonists, and then having that faction be used in new operation missions. Which brings us to which enemy faction I want to see. The way I see it, I think it's likely that we're going to get multiple enemy factions, more than 3, at least at some point down the line. So really this is just a which one do you want first kind of question. I think the Necrons are the most likely. There's that big tomb world that we found underground. They have that picture hinting at their implementation, and they're just very cool. There are interesting narrative things they could do with the Necrons, especially since the creative director has talked about how interesting it would be to explore Necron stories. So I think Necrons are most likely, but what I personally would like to see, either first or eventually, is the Tau. Not necessarily for their story importance, though that could be interesting too, but because they have a very wide selection of enemy units that you could implement into the game. The Tau remind me of the Covenant from Halo, in that they're an advanced alien civilization with many different races making up its coalition, giving it potential for a very high enemy variety. You've got Kroot, flying Vespids, humans that joined the Tau Empire. There's a lot of other ones that they could choose to depict, and then there's the Tau themselves and their mechs. There's a lot of room here for an interesting faction to fight. I've heard that there are people that don't like the Tau thematically. They don't seem to fit in the 40k universe. But even those people, I think, would enjoy fighting this diverse group of enemies. And if nothing else, they get to kill the enemy faction that they dislike so much. Now let's talk about the multiplayer. The PvP is not something that appeals to me. I'm not interested in what it's offering. So we're going to focus on the operations. For me, that's the meat and potatoes of this game, and the place where it has the highest potential. And before we talk about what I would like introduced to operations, first we should discuss how they should fix or change the way it works currently. First of all, it's riddled with connectivity issues. It feels like 40% of the time when I'm trying to load into a mission, it will try to pair me with other people, then fail, get me stuck on a loading screen for 5 minutes, and then when it kicks me back to the battle barge, it will no longer pair me with anybody. Even when I'm trying to play with friends and invite them to the barge, it will often get them stuck in loading screens and will have to retry often. Assuming they fix the connectivity issues, the next thing they should work on is not loading me into missions that have people using the same class that I'm using. If I choose a class in the battle barge, that's probably the class that I want to use for my operation, and I might not be interested in using a different type at that moment. So it's very annoying when they load me into somebody's mission type. Those people playing the mission already have someone with the class I intend to use, which means I'll either have to play something I don't want to play, or I'll have to load into the mission, quit, go to the battle barge, and try again. It's very irritating. I don't mind that they want you to have one class per person. There are balance reasons for that, there are narrative reasons for that. But I would appreciate if they don't put me into either a lobby or an ongoing mission that has someone that's using the class I'm interested in using. Once that's cleared up, they should change how much experience and rewards you get based on which mission you're doing. Currently, you get the same amount of experience and rewards regardless of which operation you're doing, but these operations are not equal. Some are significantly harder than others, which gives an incentive to people to just do the first mission over and over, since it is in fact the easiest. I think the devs should look at their data, see what missions are getting cleared the least, and give additional experience rewards for doing those missions, and maybe even put more armory data in those areas. a higher chance for bosses to spawn in those missions. Anything that would give people an incentive to do those rather than just do the first mission over and over. The same thing should be applied to quick play. Choosing quick play and putting you in somebody else's lobby should give you a bonus experience and rewards more than you would have gotten otherwise. Alright, finally let's talk about what I want from Operations going forward. What I like about Operations is that they are story-based missions with clear objectives. The first 5 are counterparts to what happened in the main story. The objectives are tied to what was needed then. The 6th mission, though, doesn't happen in the main story, but still apparently canonically happens at some point. And so what I hope for Operations in the future is, first of all, a lot more of them. 2 or 3 is simply not enough. 10 more isn't even enough. In Operations, there's a lot of choices you can make. You can choose different weapons, you can have perks on those weapons set up different ways, you can have the perks on your character set up in different ways. There are interesting build choices that you can make, and leveling up new weapons requires you to use them. And to upgrade them all the way requires that you play in the higher levels. It's a very interesting system with a lot of replay value, but not so much replay value at the moment, since 6 missions, like I said, is just not enough. Now, for future Operations, one of the most important things to me is that they have narrative value. And that seems to be something that's important to the devs too. The creative director, when asked about Operations, said that there are a lot of untold stories in a war of this size. We are already creating new content for Operations that will expand on the narrative, lots more to come. So given that narratives and stories are going to be a focus for future Operations, it's my opinion that these stories shouldn't be one-off for each operation. It'd be better if these operations had narrative arcs that lasted for several, 3 to 5 operations long, for example. Not only is it easier to tell stories this way, it's easier to make the stories high quality. For example, you could introduce a Biotitan to the Terminid Swarm, and have it be the ultimate objective of a series of operations to bring it down. Or, if they do include Necrons in some future update, you can depict the exploration and/or accidental activation of their tomb world as one operation, with the Space Marines escaping, and then 2 or 3 operations depicting the immediate aftermath. There's a lot of interesting places they can go with this. I guess my point is that I just want a lot more from Space Marine 2. I like what I got, but I'm simply not ready to leave. This is the most polished and perhaps the best a video game has done in depicting the 40k universe. And if I'm going to engage in this setting more, this is the place I want to do it. I'm happy to hear that the creative director is excited to tell more stories in this game, and I hope I've interpreted his words right to mean that there is a lot more content than people are expecting in the coming years. That's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.